morning, ladies. So today is our last day of identifying commonalities between two historical figures. So again, today you're going to be identifying some commonalities between actual historical figures. We're going to do two sets. So our first set is with Harriet Tubman and Paul Revere. So true story number 11. Harriet Tubman is well known for risking her life as a conductor on the Underground Railroad, which led escaped slaves to freedom in the North. But did you know that the former slave also served as a spy during the Union during the Civil War and was the first woman in American history to lead a military expedition? Tubman decided to help the Union Army because she wanted freedom for all those who were forced into slavery, not just the few that she could help by herself. And she convinced many of her other brave African Americans to join her as spies, even though that risked being hanged if they were caught. One of her most dramatic and dangerous roles, Tubman helped Colonel James Montgomery plan a raid to free slaves from plantations along the Combahee River in South Carolina. Early on the morning of June 1st, 1863, three gunboats carrying several hundred male soldiers along with Harriet Tubman set out on their mission. Tubman had gathered key information from her scouts about the Confederate positions. She knew where they were hiding along the shore. She also found out that they had placed torpedoes, or barrels filled with gunpowder, in the water. As the early morning fog lifted on some of the South's most important rice plantations, the Union expedition hit hard. The raiders set fire to the buildings and destroyed bridges, so they couldn't be used by the Confederate Army. They also freed about 750 slaves, men, women, and children, and babies. Did not lose one soldier in the attack. All right, so let's take a peek now at Paul Revere. You may know the story of Paul Revere and the Midnight Ride. However, Paul Revere was a man of many trades, and he was well known as an artist or craftsman, but he also served as a dentist, copperplate engraver, hardware and home goods store owner, iron and brass foundry owner, manufacturer of church bells, manufacturer of iron bolts and fittings for ships, owner of the first copper mill in the United States, and manufacturer of copper planting and copper goods. Even though he was a silversmith by trade, Revere paid most of his bills by becoming an amateur dentist to help support his mother and 18 children. He used his skills as a craftsman to wire dentures made of walrus ivory or animal teeth into patients' mouth. In 1776, Paul Revere became the first person in United States history to practice forensic dentistry. He identified the body of a friend, Joseph Warren, 9 months after the well-known soldier died during the Battle of Bunker Hill, by recognizing wiring he had used on a false tooth. When Revere wasn't trying to support his family with dentistry, he produced some of the most sophisticated and famous copperplate engravings, creating illustrations used in books, magazines, and political cartoons. He also created fancy silverware and china for the wealthy people in Boston, bringing in a large amount of money to support his family during struggling financial times. As a corporate engraver, Revere began producing political engravings that supported the Patriots' cause. He produced a great number of political engravings and cartoons that influenced many colonists in their thinking toward Great Britain. His most famous engraving was one of the Boston Massacre. Okay, so for these two stories, again, similar directions to yesterday. What do these historical figures have in common? Directions. Identify the commonality between the two historical figures below, and be sure to support your thinking with details from the text. Mark up the text during your second read of each paragraph to help guide your thinking. So again, Harriet Tubman and Paul Revere, shared character trait. Number 2, similarity between the stories. And number 3, who was more impressive to you and why. So again, when we're identifying this shared character trait, you're identifying the words and actions of each of the characters. So for your second read, maybe go back and underline all of those details in the text. Number 3 is an opinion question. You just need to defend your stance and support it with text evidence. You can only choose one. And then for number 2, again, the similarity between the stories. Pay attention to how the story is being told, the effect that the character maybe has on other characters, what the author wants you to learn. All right, let's go take a peek now at our next two stories. So Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, a lot of Roosevelts we've been learning about. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was well known for his radio broadcasted fireside chats, in which he tried to restore public confidence in the government with open communication with American citizens about issues involving the government. However, when he wasn't on the radio, Roosevelt was not found fond of idle chat in everyday life. Many times his wife Eleanor would have to beg him to attend social gatherings. As Franklin would say, they were a useless waste of time and energy. Roosevelt was quite friendly and humorous in conversation, so very few knew he was actually more of a homebody or recluse than a social butterfly. Roosevelt was often bored by tedious small talk that was required of him at social functions, parties, and get-togethers. He often felt as those with whom he had conversations were seldom paying attention to what he had said. To prove Roosevelt's point, sometimes Roosevelt would begin a conversation by saying, "I murdered my grandmother this morning." Often those words were met with public approval by simple nods, proving that no one cared what he had said anyway. On one occasion, however, an attentive listener gave a witty reply, "I'm sure she had it coming her way, sir." Oops, too far. Too far. Okay, true story number 14, Harry S. Truman. President Harry S. Truman was born May 8, 1884 in Lamar, Missouri, the oldest child of John Anderson Truman and Martha Ellen Young Truman. Truman had no idea that many years after his birth name would cause so much controversy. Only in American could drama erupt over whether or not it was appropriate to have a period after the S in Truman's middle name. The problem arose because journalists didn't understand that the S didn't stand for a specific name. It was his middle name. At birth, his parents had disagreed over whether to have Harry's middle name honor his maternal grandmother, Solomon Young, or if his middle name should honor his paternal grandmother, Anderson Ship Truman. What happens when neither parent will budge on what middle name to choose for their new baby boy? They simply compromised and name him S. But it seems that Truman may have caused the controversy himself, mostly out of fun, as he was well known for his good sense of humor. He told a group of reporters in 1962 that the period shouldn't be omitted because it would keep people guessing what the S stood for. Even though it was not correct, Truman would usually sign his name with a period after the S. President Truman was happy to know that here we are many years later discussing it. So again, what do these historical figures have in common? You're going to go through and now you're comparing Harry S. Truman and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Okay, shared character trait. Again, you're going to identify shared character trait by underlining the words and actions of each of the historical figures for your second read. Number 2, similarity between the stories. You're paying attention to how the story is being told, different themes, different messages from the author, or maybe how the historical figure has impacted others in the story. And then number 3, who is more impressive to you and why? This is just an opinion question, so you can choose whichever one you like. There's no wrong answer, but you just need to back up your stance with text evidence. Okay, so to provide a little assistance with number 2, I believe that is the most challenging of the questions for each of the comparison passages. So for Harriet Tubman and Paul Revere, similarity between the stories, some that I thought of were both are famous for their journeys, but these stories are about other jobs that they held. So again, the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, and then Harriet Tubman being a conductor on the Underground Railroad, that is what they're most famous for, but this talks about all the other jobs that they had. And yeah, so both were people of many trades. So Harriet, she was a spy for the army. She was also a recruiter of other African Americans during the time. And Paul Revere, he was a dentist and an engraver, along to the very famous roles that they played. Down for, and again, you don't have to use these, but these are just maybe something to guide your thinking. Feel free to add or eliminate whatever you choose. So Franklin D. Roosevelt and Harry S. Truman, similarity between the two stories is trying to outwit others. FDR with the small talk to try to prove that others weren't listening. And then Harry S. Truman, he tried to trick others about his middle name. And another similarity between the stories is that both were presidents who enjoyed humor in addition to politics. So again, we can even take that and try to help that with our character traits as well if you're struggling to find a similarity in that sense. So because it's Wednesday, I want to make sure that you are not forgetting about your weekly extended writing prompt. So your opinion prompt for this week, Wednesday is a great day to get it done or at least get it started, is predict what the world will look like in 30 years. How will the world be the same? How will the world be different? What do you hope may be invented or replaced? Alrighty.